I'm Cassian Elwes. I'm a former agent, now independent filmmaker. I've worked on over 100 movies. I'd like to do a discussion about independent cinema now because we're at a very kind of critical juncture, I think. A lot of people out there keep asking me, where are we? What's happening? What's going on with films? And so I thought I'd get the experts. So here I have Christine Vachon, one of the greatest independent producers of all time, Franklin Leonard, who, as everybody knows, runs the Blacklist and is probably the most important conduit for young screenwriters into the movie business. Rena Ronson, who, full disclosure, was my partner for 10 years in William Morris Independent, and now is a leader in the independent cinema area of United Talent Agency, UTA. And then Micah Green, who I got to know when he was an agent at CAA and was in the independent department there, and now basically runs his own operation. Maybe, Micah, you could tell us a little bit about it because, I'm not as familiar with your company as the others.
Yeah, well, so I partnered with Dan Friedkin and Dan Steinman in a company called 30 West, which is an investment business. I mean, the most simple way to think about it is that we're an investment business focused on the entertainment arena. We principally invest in movies, movie production, but we also make corporate investments across the sector. And we're pretty optimistic about the space. So hopefully I'll bring some positivity and optimism to the conversation. We'll see where it goes.
So I'm going to start with Christine because, you are, and this is an unfortunate word, but it's used on me all the time, a veteran in this space. And you are in Paris, you said, I think, just before we went live here. You've seen it all from really the beginning of the kind of golden age of independent cinema till now. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what your life is like now. Is it easier, harder? What is it like trying to raise money? What is it like trying to put movies together? What is it like trying to find distribution? How do you find the whole independent cinema arena at the moment?
Well, first, I just want to say, is veteran a euphemism for old?
See, I think legend is a better option. So with just like one random word, that would be the one that I would choose.
So, but okay, I'll take it. And my full disclosure is, Rena and I went to high school together, even though she looks more like she has a picture in the attic than I do.
Which makes me a veteran too.
Yeah.
By the way, I've seen the photo and I love it. It's the coolest thing ever.
I'm here in Paris because Todd Haynes is having a retrospective at the Pompidou Center, which is an amazing thing. And in some ways, as my partner Pam Koffler pointed out, she said, it's kind of your retrospective too. And he gets the much better hotel room, etc. But it's true because it allows me to look at the past 30 years. And so much of it was the work that we did together. And I'm going to Cannes with one of his movies, which I think was a Blacklist script, May, December. But all to say, I don't even know if it's easier or harder. It's just different. I think you're going to succeed in staying in this business this long. It's really about getting a good sense of how things are shifting and shifting with them. So, I feel like I'm not, sorry, I'm in Paris, as you can tell. I feel like it's not really a question of like what's harder or easier. It's more about finding different opportunities. I keep saying as a mantra, out of great disruption comes great opportunity. And I think it's true. I really do. And Micah said, you said you were going to inject some optimism, but I don't think you can do this without being optimistic. And, I am incredibly optimistic about the different ways in which we figure out how to get our movies financed and how to get them seen. Look, would I love everybody to be packing in at the art house theaters? Of course I would. I think we all would. But I also think there's opportunities for different kinds of movies to find a place to be seen that they didn't have before.
I think you're right. I think there's just so much opportunity out there in different ways to see films. In a way, I don't know, Rena, you've seen it all. Has it changed for you as an agent in the middle of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that look, we're so used to cycles. There are cycles in our industry constantly. We talk about the waves, and it's constantly that way, and we just have to pivot to figure out what the solution is in that moment. I think the difference, probably the past 3 years, is that these cycles are more frequent. They're happening, right? More of them. We got COVID. The streamers contracted. People became more risk averse. There's all these things that are hitting us. But because we're indie and we roll up our sleeves, our job is to figure out, as we always have, alternative ways to get movies made, figure out the budgets, what the content really is that people want. Because ultimately, if we want people to go to theaters more, we need to make the films that will get them to the theaters. It's different. It's really what makes the job so interesting, because it's constantly changing. So we have to exercise our brain in a different way, which is figuring out those ways to get the movies made and to read more diligently. I remember, starting in this business in my veteran days back in like the late 80s, early 90s. And you could, we joke about this, but you could sell something just by showing them like a video, a piece of art. And it was different. It was fun. It was, just a different business. It's become more of a business, and I think that's actually interesting to some extent, but it's about merging the creative and the business together, and that's, I think, what we are all doing right now.
The collision of art and commerce.
Correct.
Micah, you were saying yesterday that, or a couple of days ago when we first started talking about this, that we had to be a bit more conscientious about the types of films that we were making and how many films we're making and what kind of films. And I know that you have an opinion about that a little bit, and I'm just wondering, if you could let us, discuss that, and we could also jump into on it.
Yeah, that's my favorite topic. But also, I think in a way, I think the first topic that I always like to address is the sort of definitional issue, because we all have been talking about independent film for quite a long time. Some of us longer than others, but all of us decades. And I've seen the definition of independent film change, or at least become very contextual. We're sometimes talking about films that are made kind of DIY with friends and family, usually with emerging filmmakers making them. Sometimes we're talking about really sort of what sometimes people call smart house movies, just intelligent, sort of left of center movies, which may have been made by a studio and at any budget, but they're still sort of called independent anyway. And there's kind of all other sorts of variations. I think generally when we're talking about independent movies, we're talking about, anyway, my kind of colleagues, we're talking about movies that aren't being funded by the studios, and whatever's really in fashion or vogue for the studios. And sometimes that is very kind of elevated smart house movies, but whatever they're not funding by nature sort of becomes independent. And those tend to be risky movies because they're being made usually without distribution. And my feeling has been, for as long as I've been in the business, there has been opportunity in independent filmmaking and making movies that are not what like establishment studios are making, generally making them at a low budget because they're inherently risky. They're by nature risky, but also those very movies, the ones that are being made independently that are not low budget versions of what studios are making, but are movies that are attempting to do something different, when they succeed, and succeed meaning they're sort of qualitatively strong and critics generally find them successful, but also audiences really enjoy them. And that's usually evidenced at film festivals. When all those things happen, there's sort of explosive opportunity for the filmmakers, for the film itself. There's a ton of profit potential in those movies. They're always the exception to the rule, because that is kind of by definition what they are. These are the movies studios don't want to make. Some group of people decide to make them anyway, sort of by hook or by crook. They prove to the world that they're kind of creatively worthwhile. They demonstrate that there's potential audience interest in them. And again, when that happens, major studios kind of react. There's this sort of shift in focus of the types of movies that are really not going to be. So suddenly, non-independent studio films start to look more like whatever that successful independent film was. And really what independent film then has to become is something else. So independent film is like this constant state of reinvention. It's inherently unstable and risky. And I think most outsiders look at the business at a macro level. They'll look at the like the stats around the number of independent films that get made versus those that are released, or the number of movies released versus those that are profitable, the stats always look terrible. But at the same time, for that sort of like small group of exceptional films, really strong independent movies that are then again presented and embraced by the community, which happens all the time, those economics look great. So, and in a way, I would say, we could talk more about it later, but maybe better today than they ever have. So that's why I'm sort of generally positive. If you're looking at the sector, if someone wants to sort of survey the landscape of non-studio funded movies and ask the question, is it a good investment to find, support, invest time and or money in really talented people who are trying to make really commercially appealing films? Yeah, it's kind of it can be an incredible investment.
I think that actually leads really well into Franklin. You know, when the Blacklist got started, it was a list of the best. You had set up a website. Well, you probably better describe what you actually did, but which I would love you to do. But I've seen so much in the last few years of you reaching out to young writers, young filmmakers, and setting up programs to help them, because you're right at the nexus of the beginning of the journey for a lot of filmmakers. And why did you do that? Why did you feel it was necessary to go out and try to help? And I kind of know the answer, by the way, but I think the people out there would like to understand what your thought process was and why you started setting up these programs through the Blacklist to help people. And what do you say to them? Are you saying to them, write what you feel from your heart? You write stuff that could be commercial? How do you approach that part of it too, at the beginning for people?
I think actually the answer to that question surprises a lot of people, because I think there's an assumption that when you work in the indie space or you're seeking out writers from outside the traditional system, that there's some sort of altruistic impulse behind it. And I have to be totally honest, it's exactly the opposite, right? Like, all the work the Blacklist does comes from a fundamental desire to improve the economics of the industry generally. I just happen to know, going back to what Rena said about like going back to reading, starting with the best screenplay, and seems particularly topical given the moment of the Writers Guild, is the best business plan. And to sort of echo what Micah was saying about, the economics of, there's the economics of the indie space, everything being made outside of the studios generally, and investing in that ETF is probably a bad investment. But there are, subcategories of that ETF that are actually far better economics than the industry. And to offer some sort of self-serving data on that front that backs what Mike is saying, Harvard Business School did a study 3 years ago about the financial performance of scripts that were on the Blacklist when they get produced. And what they found is that, controlling for all other factors, movies made from Blacklist scripts, some of which admittedly were distributed by the studios, made 90% more in revenue than movies made from scripts that were not on the Blacklist, controlling for all other factors. I didn't make those movies. The Blacklist didn't make those movies. I didn't direct them, produce them, gaff them, do craft service on them. But I think we did a very good job in finding the needles amidst all of the haystacks and confirming the thesis that a good script, no matter how seemingly strange, no matter how seemingly not what the studios assume are commercial based on conventional wisdom that is all convention and no wisdom, you start with a good screenplay and talented people around that screenplay who are going to go the extra mile for it. You end up not only with the great cinema we all love, but also like really good financial results. And sort of moving in opposition to the studios oftentimes on a content basis is a really good business plan, because they are so traditionally bad at identifying what audiences want. In terms of what I tell young filmmakers to write, I tell them not to think about the commerciality of it, and I try to guide them away from telling their own story, sort of beat for beat. The most recent advice I've given is that, if you want to think about the viability of something in the marketplace, make sure that something you're writing is the kind of movie that one of your group chats, doesn't matter which one, it could be your friends from college, your friends from church or religious institution, but like one of your group chats, the second that movie drops and they didn't know that you had written it, that group chat would light up saying, oh, we all have to go see that movie on Friday. And there are infinite group chats in the world with infinite amounts of interest in big commercial movies and small, thoughtful indies. But make sure somebody's going to be very excited by the movie that's not directly related to you or just you.
Right. Talking about the internet and group chat and and the way that that's affected independent cinema. I mean, Rena, I'm this is a very big question, but obviously, what happened? What happened in the last 5 years to the way films get distributed in America, and how did that happen? And what's the answer in terms of what we're doing to try to figure out what the next steps are? And Micah, you could join in, or we can all join in, to talk about how COVID affected it, streamers, what's happened in the last 5 years that changed the way independent films are being seen.
Pretty obvious what happened. I mean, it's funny because we used to, when we would sell movies or we'd put an evaluation on the US, right? We'd always have that worst case scenario, home entertainment will buy it. And then it became, and I won't mention the names, X distributor will buy it. So we've started valuing it with that. And then it turned into streamers will buy it. That became our sort of go-to worst case scenario. And in my opinion, and anyone please chime in because this is just a discussion, it flipped. It flipped when COVID hit 3 years ago, and that was the only place to see content. And because of that, we became creatures of this habit that now, 3 years later, however many, it's about 3+ years later, we're trying to break. And it's the habit that, I have sitting in front of my television and watching a series and how to get back to the film.
One of the things that I've heard people talk about that I'm kind of on the fence about is if, as you say, during the pandemic, did we also evolve into thinking that character-driven drama was something we should watch at home?
Really, the limited series that started, showing up on our streaming channels, so strong, it did affect that sort of dramatic film that you would go to the theater for when you could sit at home and watch 5 episodes of it. Got really good. TV got good, not just streamers, but obviously HBO. It got exponential. I don't know. I'm not in the straight television business, but I noticed it. I started watching series after series and binging, but that binging really did begin during COVID for me. I don't know if anyone else had that same experience.
Well, I have a theory about that, which I guess is, I don't think it's contrarian on this Zoom, but I often find it's contrarian when I'm talking to people, which is that my feeling is that the quality of television has clearly gone up and dramatic storytelling on television has gone up. But my theory is that what that has done is refined the taste of an enormous global audience. And I think like most of us, the more people see really high quality film or film and TV, I think the more they crave it. I don't think people just get satisfied. And I don't think that the reason people aren't going to the theater to see dramas is that they are no longer interested in seeing drama in the theater. I think when there is dramatic work that's exclusively playing in theaters, and that dramatic work is, the word of mouth about it is that it's extraordinary and moving, right? And sort of worth seeing in the theater because, let's face it, it's not just something you're going to intellectually appreciate, but you're going to emotionally appreciate. When that's happening, I think people go to the theater and will go to the theater. And it's been hard. Whenever I find myself in debates with people, I'm always asking sort of for the examples, like show me the example of a really great dramatic film or any independent film that's getting great reviews, that audiences love, and that's well marketed, and it's playing in the theater, and people aren't going. Because I definitely can cite examples of films that actually fall short of that, but people are going to the theater. It's sort of like the bar is actually not even that high, but there is a bar. It has to be good. It has to be playing exclusively in the theater, and it has to be well marketed. And it has to be entertaining. And entertaining, I think, can be a tearjerker. It can be a slow, challenging drama, but it still has to be something that kind of like touches your heart, and you want to feel like, or people leave the theater feeling it was an experience. And I think when that happens, they go, and I think they'll continue to go.
I mean, we're opening Past Lives in a few weeks, and I'm hoping. Obviously, we're all hoping that it certainly hits every single thing you just said, and I'm hoping that the experience will reflect that.
The movie's phenomenal, and it absolutely deserves to be seen in a movie theater. I saw it in Sundance, and I know, Rena, And what I really loved about it, I have to say, is that, 10 years ago, even, 5 years ago, people weren't trying so hard to make independent films that had any type of diversity in them. And that's changed. And, and those films have gone from being, slightly marginalized to being front and center. And I just love that. I think the film works so well, and it doesn't matter who, the ethnicity of anybody in the film. It just works. It's great.
I'm not convinced that it's changed in any sort of final form, and I worry, especially given the current shocks to the industry system. There's a long history of diverse communities being last in and first out, and I'm also not sure that it's as easy for a great filmmaker of color or a woman of color to get the financing necessary for their movie vis-a-vis your sort of standard white male filmmaker in the U.S.
Without a doubt.
It's governed by foreign sales or by sort of financial patrons that are disproportionately white and male and make decisions oftentimes even more extreme than the studios do, because their opinions about what's marketable in the regions that they represent are steeped in racism and misogyny.
I totally agree with you, Franklin.
I think it's right in the independent space, and it's not often talked about. I think people have a nostalgia for the glory days of independent cinema, but they weren't glory days for a large percentage of filmmakers that were trying to get things made and would have made amazing things if they had the resources to do so.
I completely agree with you, by the way. And, we've all faced it, by the way. All of us, as agents, and Christine too, have faced this challenge. Every time we step up with something that looks different, I can only speak from my own experience, from when we went out to try to raise the money for the Butler, and it's a $25 million film, and we could only get to $4 million of an international offer for the film, which, in the real world is peanuts. And then in the end was saved by a Ukrainian billionaire called Len Blavatnik, who came in from his UK company and put in $6 million, and that made the big difference for us and got the movie made. And then, ironically, the movie did $80 million overseas and was gigantic. And this is and massive, and actually biggest in Paris of all places, Christine. But and then trying to go out and raise money for Mudbound and sell the distribution for it for a Black female director was very difficult and challenging. And so from my own experience, I know all of this. But I got to believe that well, I have seen a sort of sea change. I don't know if it's obviously not enough, but I'm starting to see. And maybe I'm wrong, Franklin. And tell me that I am. That there's slightly more opportunity.
The honest answer is that I don't know, because there's no real data to sort of judge it by. I just have the experiences of filmmakers who are members of those communities to base it on. And, I think all of us, having been in the industry long enough, have seen, a menu of various projects that could have gone forward, and the amount of work and sort of professionalism that went into those things and the quality of the work. The standard just is much higher for women and diverse filmmakers to get the resources necessary to make the thing. When they make it, they have less resources. When they put it into the marketplace, the critics don't look like them. They don't have similar life experiences. Neither do the curators at the festivals. Neither do the distributors and marketers. So they're fighting an uphill battle.
UT, our IQ department, did a big study and a deep dive and the theatrical market, and diverse audiences, Gen Z, millennials, they're the ones that are driving attendance for sure in the US. And the real hole for us, according to the study, is how do we reengage the boomers? That is the group that we want to reengage in the theaters. And I think the way we do that, to Micah's point, is good content. And to Franklin's point, creating good content that group will go out and see.
The interesting thing about Past Lives is, and I won't go into, the whole history of it, but it did come to us because it lost its producer. And the challenge initially was Celine was a playwright, and she hadn't even ever made a short film. I mean, she had really come from, a theatrical background, and she didn't know the first thing, it seemed, about making a film. But the thing that she did know, and this is something that, my partner Pam kept saying, she knows the story she's telling. And the rest, we could show her how to read a call sheet. We could teach her how to talk to a DP. And the great thing also about Celine, I think, was, not to male bash, but because she didn't have that ego or defensiveness about what she didn't know, she was completely honest. The production designer just asked me this question. I have no idea what they're talking about. And we could just easily say, well, this is, they're trying to figure out this, that, or the other thing. And because she was reasonably egoless in that way and really understood what she didn't know, it made it very easy for us to help her. And again, as Pam said, she knew the story she was trying to tell, and she knew it intimately, specifically, and perfectly. So in some ways, we just got to go along for that ride.
So Micah, we touched on this yesterday. I don't want to go negative in this area, but I do think it's important for people to understand where we are in the world now of distribution in America for independent cinema, because it has really changed since COVID, and maybe probably because of COVID. And how, when you look at a movie and you start to value it too, does your old agent hack come in and start thinking, okay, well, how am I going to sell this? Where am I going to sell it? What's it worth? What's the international worth? What's domestic worth? And is the streaming value something that factors into your mind, or you just figured that that's something that would be gravy if it happens, or not for the movie later on?
Yeah, well, we'll say the short answer is yes, we definitely do that. Any project we're evaluating, we're trying to forecast sales potential and or box office potential, sometimes a combination of the two. But of course, you need distribution to have a shot at box office. And I will say the pendulum seems to have swung back to maybe how it was 10, 15 years ago, where, sort of as Rena said, we can't take for granted distribution or a sale in most cases, certainly when we're making movies, which we like to do, without casts filled with stars. And again, that just reinforces the idea that this is a risky business. It's a risky business that has kind of really wonderful rewards when things work. But the idea that you can be making movies in this climate and just assume that you're selling it for at least for a significant percent of your budget, that you're selling it during or after production, I think that's generally naive. Now, a few years ago, there was definitely a period of time when it felt like, I don't even know if this is the case, but it sure felt like streaming companies were going to buy anything of even decent quality. And there was this sense of a safety net there, I think, for a lot of filmmakers and for a lot of financiers. And in fact, the streaming companies did get so aggressive in their financing, not only the streaming companies and distributors, even A24 would be an example. They all got so aggressive in their competition to grab anything that could be good, that they started pre-buying and financing independent movies at a really high volume. So much so that I think it kind of completely tilted the heads of sellers and producers, and a large chunk of the community of filmmaking talent started relying upon, ironically, streamers and studios for the financing or at least the distribution. We can debate whether that was ever a good thing, but it doesn't really matter because it's over. And I think for most...
When you say it's over, you mean like the streamers just stop buying?
We're relying on worst case, we sell it to a streamer. Yeah.
Right. You can't count on it. I think in this climate, you just never really know which projects are going to really spark not just light interest, but strong interest from streamers or studios. And not that it's gravy, but I'd say it should be a filmmaker's goal to try to get as many potential buyers, financiers interested in their project as possible, to have some optionality as to who they'll work with, what they'll be paid to work. But again, it's a complicated environment in a way, and I think it's a sincere endorsement. I think people need really informed representation today, more than they ever have, because it's just not a simple. It's not a simple system. It's not so straightforward or transactional how one puts financing together or finds distribution. But I do think. But there are all kinds of ways to find distribution, to find financing, to find distribution, to both make money and have a really exciting release. Some of those are streamer prioritized. There are great examples of movies that had a wonderful life being financed by or sold to streamers and presented exclusively in that context. But for many movies, that's not at all the right path. So I do think, I'm not a representative anymore, but I enjoy talking to reps, as you know, Rena, and collaborating and trying to figure out movie to movie. It's just really a bespoke business that we're in. So, finding the right path for each project.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about the difference between when we're selling a film, going to a streamer, going theatrical, and there's the economics of the offer, which 100% is sometimes an issue depending on the budget and all those things. But there's also the filmmaker's desire. I mean, there are plenty of examples where we passed on a streaming deal and went theatrical, like Lulu Wang's Farewell. The Farewell she chose. She wanted her film in theaters. It was important to her. We had a feature documentary, same thing, streamer versus neon, and they wanted the theatrical exposure because it was very filmic. But what's interesting is it's become this, there's an eyeball conversation that comes out. How many eyeballs? Who's going to go see my movie? You're on Netflix, you know how many people are going to see your film. You hit a button, it's everywhere. And so,
well, that's, by the way, the big problem with the W.
I'm not saying that's what we do, but that is like a filter in people's ears. They hear that and they go, well, I just want everyone to see it. But the question is, which we go back to, is yes, filmmakers want eyeballs, we want eyeballs, but what about the noise? What about the consistency? What about, does this film, is this film have a lasting, conversation, and sometimes they come and go, sometimes they get buried, sometimes they don't have the support, but that's the dance we're constantly in, is evaluating what is better for that particular film and that filmmaker and that financier and all the parties involved.
How important do you think film festivals now have become in terms of independent cinema?
We're about to undertake a very obvious example. We're bringing May, December to Cannes without a North American sale in place, the intention of using, hopefully, the noise of the festival to sell the movie. And we're not showing it to distributors beforehand, which was something, we discussed long and hard. And look, if it works, we're brilliant. And if it doesn't, then the ones who said we should have were brilliant.
Okay, but it's a brilliant film, so it's going to sell.
It is a brilliant film.
Just switching gears for 1 second, Franklin, how would you define a successful independent movie now at this point?
One that delivers a financial profit that exceeds what you could get by investing in a conservative mutual fund, one that is well received by audiences that people will still be talking about 20 years from now, no matter how small that group of people is.
All those things, or like two of those things, or
I think it can be successful if it does any of those things. But I think that like the elite tier are the ones that, sort of have a permanence, that have an artistic resonance and exceptionalism, and make the argument both for that filmmaker to have a sustained career, but also for the investment model of independent cinema to receive more investment. So if you beat the market, you're making a positive case for somebody else getting money to try to accomplish the same thing. Success is a many splendid thing, and it should be. And I think if we don't think of it that way, we're all going to leave this business very quickly.
We have to wrap up in a second, but I want to just ask the last question to everybody. Are you hopeful?
always.
Always. Have to be.
I'm very hopeful.
Well, and Franklin, are you hopeful?
I am, but I'll admit that it's a practice conscious optimism, as I suspect it is for all of us. It's a choice to be hopeful. I think that there are many reasons to not be hopeful. I think we also, as a group, have the advantage of being in close proximity to extraordinary artists who accomplish extraordinary things consistently. And as a result, we see what's possible in the face of all of these challenges, because people are still knocking out brilliant film that sort of meet all three criteria that I just mentioned. And that makes you hopeful when you wake up in it. And it's why I think we continue to try to do this, because we know that possibility exists, and we know with a better system and people administering it, those things happening can happen more frequently, which, creates a virtuous cycle of hope that we can all sort of live in.
Would you guys encourage young filmmakers to stay in this business and try to do it, or find other things to do at this point?
I would absolutely encourage them to, but I would encourage them to do it eyes open and to be audacious about what they're trying to do. Trying to be better than the worst thing that came out last weekend and saying, why isn't my thing happening, is not the path through. Looking at the greats, the people who do break through, and saying, how do I do my version of that as good, if not better than people who did it the best, should be your goal. Because if you fall short from that, you still have a chance of breaking through. But if you're setting these goals of like, I just want to be as good as the worst thing, it's never going to happen for you. So you got to come in open eyes, you got to come in audacious, and you got to come in with the level of resilience that you probably don't think you need to survive what is fundamentally a business of rejection and failure, with extraordinary joy at the other end if you can survive it.
100%. I mean, look, which we talked about in the beginning, I think that it's about, riding the wave and keeping your focus on what people want and how to achieve that, and to get and to find the material that is going to resonate the way Franklin just mentioned. So, I can look back and think about films that really broke that, like Call Me by Your Name, Lady Bird, The Big Sick. These were all incredible films made at a rational budget, and then they went on. And not just, critically, but financially, awards worthy, everything. And I think to that end, it's identifying that material. It all does start with the script, and it's about finding those, not being afraid of those original stories. I mean, our world, we want to see original stories. We don't want to just see the sequels. I don't.
I know through recent experience that there are many more financing sources, marketing and distribution platforms than there were when I started in this business. Many more, and there's a global market, a global audience for the kind of filmmaking that we were all talking about. And I don't really recall that being the case in the early days of independent film. So the other thing that I'm seeing, but I'm really not seeing a ton of the crossover yet, is a lot of talent young people working on within YouTube and social media, doing extraordinary creative work. I mean, they really are filmmaking, and they are not, for the most part right now, making feature-length work, but there's very little to prevent them. And I think when that generation, this kind of new generation of talent, chooses, those who are the most gifted at it, chooses to do theatrical quality feature work, we're going to see like a mind-blowing film. And I think it'll come soon. So as an audience member, as a part of the industry, I'm really excited, actually.
I wake up and go to sleep thinking about making films. And when I meet somebody that I think is exciting, it just, I can't stop thinking about it. And I believe that all of us here on this feel the same way, that discovery is half of it, or maybe all of it. So Christine, I'll leave the final word to you, because I feel like, that you're brilliant at this.
I mean, look, I agree with everything Micah said. I have always said that, we make an assumption that each new generation of storytellers is doing it the same way we did, but they're not. And it is really exciting to realize that there's a whole layer of different kinds of storytelling that I'm not even supposed to know about because I'm too old, and it's should be underground. And I remember when my daughter started discovering YouTube stars, way back when, it was like when I discovered punk rock, it was speaking just to me, and it was supposed to speak just to me, in my mind. And I think every generation has that, and it is exciting to figure out our avenues to finding those talents and bringing them to the forefront. So, I'm insanely optimistic because I watch a lot. And, I think cynicism is the kiss of death. And the second you become cynical or you become like, I'm not going to bother to look at these like, amazing new movies. I'm trying not to be long-winded, but I do have to say, I decided to be on the jury of the Rotterdam Film Festival this year. And I love to be on juries, and I love to do at least one or two a year. I kind of forgotten that Rotterdam was kind of known for being like extremely avant-garde. And the first film I saw as a jury member was a 3-hour-long Icelandic film with no plot and no dialogue. And I sat there in my seat and I was like, uh-oh, like, what did I just agree to do? But it totally cast its spell. And that movie really made me re-understand the thing that I know, which is that there are movies that have to cast a spell that way. And you get something from them when you are in your seat and you're not leaving and you're not getting up to get anything. And I got a lot out of that movie, even though it had no plot and no dialogue. So anyway, that was a long-winded way of getting to the end, but so I'll stop.
I love the fact that you guys all gave up your time to do this. It really means a lot to me, to TheWrap, obviously. And I know that you have busy lives, and I feel like everything that was said today is things that need to be said and thought about. And I thought you were all brilliant, and I look forward to doing this again. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for doing it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.